Welcome to another MonetizeMore webinar. Like I said, I'm really happy to have you all attending. This is our first growth series, kind of highlighting some of the amazing publishers in the MonetizeMore community. With us today, we have Neal Parker, representing DearMember.com. He's the Director of Business Development there, and he's here to share their amazing growth story with us. So welcome, Neal.
Well, very happy to be here. MonetizeMore, again, has been one of our most important partners and a big part of our growth. So as we go through the slides today, we'll definitely talk about how they've helped us to scale, in many ways from a little start.
That's great. Yeah, no, we've been really happy kind of partnering with you guys and really helping establish your kind of ad monetization strategy. And, you guys have been continuing to grow from that point. So really happy to have you part of the community. Yeah, so quick housekeeping, this will last about 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for a question and answer period after. Feel free to ask questions in the chat on your right pane or down in the, I think there's some questions you can answer down at the below the presentation. So yeah, so welcome and enjoy the conversation. So getting started, just want to give everyone a sense for DearMember.com and where you were a year ago.
Well, that's definitely a good place to start. About a year, maybe 14 months back, DearMember effectively was a community that was built up over several years. And as far as our online presence, we had a website that was monetized in a very loose sense. And we also had this Facebook page with, I think at the time, about 5 million fans. But there wasn't much of a strategy. The company had started several years back, and as many startups, we went through some changes. So when I came in, we were using the most lowbrow AdSense monetization, and I don't know if we necessarily had a specific direction. So
very cool. Yeah, I think a lot of publishers can understand that story where you come into a site or you start out with your site, you really invest in that audience development where you don't really think about your revenue strategy and how that can really be an essential piece of your growth. So
right, and I think sometimes you don't really know what you have, or you might think you started one thing and you come to realize that it's actually something else. And one big part of our growth was understanding that we are a publishing company.
Right.
And once that got locked in, that allowed us to start really thinking about strategies and, of course, take us to where we are today, which is a great place, but we still have plenty of room to grow.
Absolutely, yeah, and we can talk a little bit more about that story and your guys' funding model changed. I know publishers are, the VC and bootstrap is always a big question when you're starting out. Give us an overview of how that transition really worked for your team.
Sure. As I'm sure everybody listening is aware, most startups don't necessarily succeed. Often they don't even get a chance to receive venture capital. DearMember, fortunately, started out with over $1 million in venture capital, quite a big valuation at the time. And over the years, there were lots of great ideas that the company tried, and unfortunately, a lot of those did not come to fruition. And again, this is, I think, a common story with businesses in general. I think it goes without saying that to succeed in any business is extremely tough. So
Yeah,
essentially,
and
yeah.
the venture model is, 1 in 10 in the portfolio really hits it to pay back the fund, right? So that's kind of, well, they're trying to have those fail fast, innovative ideas to kind of really move. So there's investor pressure to really make sure you're really burning that money and investing in as many ideas as possible to really make that thing scale. So,
Right. And I think that, obviously experimenting costs money. And a lot of companies, what they started out doing, 5 years down the road, they might be doing something totally different. But the one thing that I can say is the founder, Michael, he had published a book, I want to say in the early 2000s. It sold 500,000 copies. So he really understood that there was a demand for the nostalgic content.
right.
That was something that he stayed strong and didn't decide to close the business after it ran out of money.
Right. Yeah, and as you guys transitioned from that, stay on this slide, to that bootstrap model, what were some of the kind of goals that you started to set as you were transitioning to building out that revenue model?
Well, that's really a great question, and essentially, as I said in the beginning, we had to figure out what we were. Because, as I mentioned, when I came in, there was a Facebook page and there was a website. So we really connected the dots, understood that there is money to be made in publishing, and don't laugh at that obvious statement, but sometimes it's hard to see the most obvious choice.
Right.
So once we understood that, I would say we had this really big challenge of not having money. And it's very, very difficult to start a business or grow a business or do anything without money. So what we were able to do, and this is one of the ways that MonetizeMore played such a huge role, is we were able to make some really great partnerships. And those partnerships allowed us to operate without investing capital. And I think, I know the next slide moving forward is where would you invest?
Right.
Audience or monetization? And just to jump into that, I think that would be you can't answer that the same for every situation, but for us, we had an audience, and it was not being monetized. So the answer is both, for sure. But I think to be successful, you need to understand what your priorities are at that specific time. So, and we're talking about a year here.
Right.
So when I came in, at the best, maybe the company had made $10,000 in a month. And fortunately, we are in the 6 figures now, monthly. So in that small period of time, we did so many different things, but we needed to really start to do both at the same time. And just going back to this, and I know this webinar is hosted by MonetizeMore. I want to let you guys know they're definitely not paying me for this.
No.
But I, was able to have some great conversations, and I believe that MonetizeMore believed in us, and they saw that we had The pieces, we just needed to put them together. One of the things that MonetizeMore did for us very early on was they set up our DFP. And once you get into DoubleClick, I would say that's where you move from a general website prefab ad model up into, I guess, the major leagues, so to speak. So MonetizeMore invested their time in us because they believed in what we could do.
Yeah, and what were some of those early challenges that you were kind of really getting into when you were looking at selecting someone to help you get to that next stage? Because I think a lot of publishers are always kind of thinking, okay, well, we can work with Google, have that prefab, AdSense, drive content, drive an audience, and get my check every month. It's easy, it's fine. Like, what were some of the aspects of getting into that major leagues that you were looking for in a partner?
Well, I think that any business that I've been involved with, I've always tried to look at that business and envision what it will look like 12 months from now, 3 years from now, and so on. And ultimately, we're thinking on an enterprise level. So we want to make sure that the partnerships that we make in the early stages, when we grow, they're already set up. They have an infrastructure. They've scaled already to a place where if we were doing really big numbers, they would be able to handle that. So to have, and we've set up many partnerships like that. So effectively, we would kind of just squeeze our way in because most companies like MonetizeMore and some of our other partners, they get 1,000 emails a day, and they can't work with everybody, and it
Right.
needs to be profitable. So I've always looked at partnerships as uh, for what they actually are. And I don't like to make a deal where I feel like I won. Because if I make a deal with a partner and I feel like I won, I don't think it's a real partnership. I think a good partnership, it's a win-win. And MonetizeMore makes more money when we make more money. So not to say that I'm not that in this for the love of the content we produce, because I enjoy it. But at the end of the day, we need to pay the bills,
Yeah.
and very good to have a company with, it's almost like they're an investor. They have a vested interest in your growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always a key thing, when we're talking with publishers, transparency in your partners is always something, the ad supply chain can be a little bit of a black box in terms of sharing direct revenue. And some people kind of double dip where they represent the advertiser and the publisher. I think a lot of there's our core vision about focusing on that sell side and really being transparent with the numbers and focusing on that win-win is really something that publishers should look for in their partners, so you can be set up for that long-term growth.
I can't agree with that more. And again, with a company that was operating without capital, our only option was to make partnerships. And just to touch back on what I had said and what Brandon was talking about, the transparency in the partnership, it's so key because we're on the same team.
Right.
And in order for MonetizeMore to do the best they can do, we need to be open with them and vice versa.
Yeah, and same DFP account. It's the same ad network revenue reports. There's full transparency in the reporting that way. It's not just cutting a check every month. I think a lot of partners approach their business that way, and that's one of the things that a lot of publishers should look out for when they're getting their business development people in place to make a deal. You gotta go in and see how that relationship has really worked. So
I also just want to add one thing. So with MonetizeMore, I have to say, 14 months into the relationship, we recently moved into their premium publisher tier, which is up there with some of the top publishers in the industry. And in moving, we moved to a different team. So the team that I had been working with prior to that, our lead was one of their awesome representatives, Pedro. And Pedro, I must have talked to 3 times minimum a week, to the point that I felt like he was an extension of our company. And I guess this also goes back to transparency. When I had an idea and I was thinking about making a move, I would let him know, even if the move was counterproductive for the partnership, because some of our, or a lot of our ad revenue comes from Facebook instant articles, which we're currently monetizing through the audience network. Of course, we might change that in the near future, but even in instances where MonetizeMore didn't have skin in the game, they were there with us every step of the way. And I don't know that Pedro would be watching this, but if you are, thank you. Really, you've done so much for us.
Yeah, and that's another aspect that we really want to invest in is the customer service, or the partner level of communication is transparent, and we're available, 24-hour, like round the clock. The reports are up to date. There's discrepancy monitoring, and whenever you have a question, we're there.
And
It's not one of those things where you get an answer 3 days later, and it's kind of tier 1 support that needs to go through some levels. You get access to someone who has the expertise, and they can get you that answer you're looking for. So
right. And for anybody who has worked with me, they understand that I work on somewhat of a 24/7 schedule. So there have been many times where I've pinged somebody from MonetizeMore at midnight or 2 a.m. And gotten a response, immediately. Even last night, we had a little issue, and it was probably about 9 p.m. And I already spent the day probably with MonetizeMore, and at 9 p.m. Got in touch and we worked out the little issue. So
that's great.
Having a partner like that, it's invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you get that responsiveness, the nature of the beast of the publisher, the ad-supported model, is that every minute, every half hour, every hour, something is out of place or running into warnings and errors, that's revenue left on the table. So you really have to think about, the responsiveness of your partners, and how they approach hot fixing and troubleshooting on the clock is an essential piece. So.
And also as the new technologies roll out, because if you want to succeed in this industry, in any capacity, you really need to be willing to put in the hours, because this has to be one of the fastest changing industries. Ad tech specifically, as a sector, if you were to compare data points to a stock trader, I think you'd find that ad technology is more complex. So I'm always reading up on what the latest trends are or new technologies. And every once in a while, I beat Pedro to the punch with some of the new tech. But anytime something new has come out, if I didn't hear about it from the news, I heard about it from MonetizeMore, and sometimes they were already running the new tech.
That's right. Yeah, and we're that combination of tech and services. With our HubGuru platform and our header bidding wrapper, that is where we really invest in that testing and that future growth, so that we stay at that bleeding edge. And that's really, if you play at the margins, that's where you can really see that revenue growth for your company. So, yeah. Moving right along. So we're kind of talking about this. When you're at that point of how do I start? A lot of publishers kind of get stuck in that mode, taking a step back. They were thinking about, okay, where do I put, my efforts? I'm really am building my audience, but how do I get into setting up my DFP or getting into DoubleClick for publishers? How do I get premium advertising, ad networks, things like that? Just do they look at a partner? What's the investment on my end if I'm going to go this my own route? Speaking from that publisher's perspective, you're treating DearMember kind of at that enterprise level where you're evaluating partners that could scale with you or have already scaled. I think that's one key thing. But setting up your DFP. If someone wants to go in that route, down that route, how do they start with that?
Right. So this is obviously a topic that you could have an entire webinar on.
That's right.
So I'll just kind of give you like the 1 minute thoughts I have on this. I think that you need to look at the business in its entirety. So this is going to go a little bit away from monetization, but to be successful, you really need to understand all of the facets of your business, whether it's editorial, which I didn't really know too much about, video content production, content syndication. You just, again, you need to put the hours in, and having really good partners who are smarter than you or better than you at various things. Those are the partners you need. Those are the people you want to hire. If I could hire 10 people smarter than me, I would do it in a second, because you can only be so good at so many things. And MonetizeMore specifically, they are experts at monetization. Some of our other partners, Kiwi, who does a lot of our Facebook advertising, they are absolutely experts in their industry. Lorem, they provide all of our tech support, experts, and partnering with experts has been a really large part of our success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of goes into, the evaluating partners that we've kind of spent a lot of time kind of discussing how important that is. We can get into the implementation, as we were kind of investing in that, I think we've talked about that DFP implementation, but maybe we can talk about, when you guys started getting into the header bidding units, how would that integration go for you?
Well, I think in publishing, there's a constant battle between the user experience and the monetization. I think, fortunately, it's understood now by the users that ads are what make a website run, unless you have a subscription model, which really is not possible for us, especially at this juncture.
And sometimes it's a subscription model on top of programmatic, or it's a blend of all those revenue models together, but the ad-supported model is the primary thing that helps the publishers scale.
Yeah, I mean, it is our primary source of revenue,
Yeah,
hands down. But we also understand that we can't make that money if the users aren't engaging with the content and spending time on the site. So ad placements, the and how you set that up is extremely important. I've gotten pitched by a ton of different advertising companies, and they just want to throw in the most obtrusive, the leave behind units, the
have a have a
interstitial.
Jeep roll over your website, all that good
Right.
stuff.
Yeah, just stuff that I would love to do on some small level, but of course I would never do that.
Right.
But you know, it's very important, and MonetizeMore has proved this to me, that it's not the number of ads, it's the technology, it's the bidding structure, it's setting floor prices, and I'm sure a publisher has a page that has 10 ads on it, and only 10% of those ads are even viewable. And one of our header bidding units, is outperforming all of those 10.
Right.
Um,
And that's a
and
way better user experience on top of that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And realistically, we really do not have a ton of ads on our site. If you were to visit it on a desktop, you might see 3 to 4 on a page, and mobile the same, depending on the length of the content.
That's right. Yeah. And, through our header bidding, we're always testing, timeout length, how many advertisers are in that, and really getting into that multivariate testing. So with that unit, we're really squeezing the most value out of it, right? And I think a lot of people just think about what's another ad into that my page layout or my article layout. It should be more, am I getting the most value out of those units and those line items, and how are we approaching monetizing those? Who are we monitoring for discrepancy? We're just getting into the nuts and bolts of good ad optimization work, is where you can really find that value without compromising your user experience. And I think when we start getting into that header bidding, controlling that latency is really key, so that you're balancing your revenue and your user experience that way.
One other just note on implementation and its importance. When you have traffic coming from different sources, the traffic will have a different impact on your site. A lot of our traffic comes from Facebook. A popular ad unit would be an anchor. I don't think they're obtrusive. They're relatively common, but Facebook is not a big fan of that. So what we're doing right now is we are testing with MonetizeMore, having that unit only come up once a user gets to a page depth of 2. So if they enter from Facebook, they're not going to see that unit. But then if they continue to explore our site beyond that first page, the unit will appear. And that's obviously not the most difficult coding or anything, but it's just tests like that, and the ability to do those things and maneuver is it's just paramount.
Right, and that's that monetizing the entire session, right? And thinking
Yeah.
about that rather than just an impression. And especially if you guys, a lot of publishers are playing the traffic arb model. When you're paying to bring in that audience, you need to find a way to make sure that those campaigns are profitable. So
Oh, without a doubt.
cool. Moving right along, we're talking about optimization. Let's talk a little bit about the numbers in terms of how the results this optimization work and how that really helps you invest in other areas and scaling up. Do you remember?
Right. So one thing that is true across any industry is unless you have a bad accountant, the numbers don't lie.
Right.
So we make sure that any partner of ours, we are always evaluating to make sure that we are getting the best results. And you also, in order to quantify what is a good result, you need to have some knowledge of industry standards, and I think we'll get into that
Yeah,
in a little bit.
we can get into that right now,
Okay.
actually, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I just want to say that, and this is going to sound obvious, and it is, but since we've been able to start generating good revenue, it affords us all sorts of luxuries and most importantly affords us the ability to invest in our business, which we've in the past month and a half hired 4 new writers, and when I started, the founder's sister, I believe, was writing the content.
Right.
So come a long way.
Yeah. And when you're investing in that future growth, having your solid revenue partners and optimizing, your inventory, but also you're scaling out your audience development. And that is how you can continue to, establish DearMember as a major media player in New York and kind of across Facebook and that kind of thing. So, as you
Yeah.
guys continue to grow, what are some of the areas that you're going to be kind of continuing to focus on? So you're building out
Well,
your editorial team and
so what's I guess my 12-month goal would be to make nostalgia and Do You Remember synonymous. I would like Do You Remember to be thought of as the place for nostalgia content, whether you're on Facebook or you're on our website or Flipboard or any of the number of platforms. And I think that just getting that branding out will allow us to jump into some other areas of business where we can create additional revenue streams. And often I think when you start to be successful, you can kind of take your eye off the ball, and complacency kills businesses. So out of the past 14 months, we've increased our revenue on all but 2 months. And even with our best month, I am still thinking, what is next? And that's on a short-term micro level, and it's on a long-term big picture level. So future growth, that's the plan.
that's what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
It's maybe editorial team this quarter, but when you're thinking about 12 months, 3 years, it's really about establishing that brand and having that team in place to do that,
Right.
and the
And
partnerships and
just to the point of team, none of what we've accomplished could have been done without our staff. I've spoken a lot about the partners and how integral they've been to our success. But equally, if not more, we have an amazing staff, and we're just really, really lucky to have the townspeople working with us. And I feel the same way about our partners. We're just very fortunate because it is a tough industry. And unfortunately, we're not hearing a ton of publisher growth stories right now.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that I hope that anybody would take away from this is that it's definitely possible. And I'm also always happy to answer any questions as long as you're not in direct competition with us.
That's right. Yeah. Stay in your own niche.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, get into the bonus of the am I making the industry average, and then we'll get into the Q&A period. Don't see a ton of questions right now, so everyone who's attending, please fire away. But yeah, we can get into yeah, what are some of the industry averages that you've kind of seen as you kind of evaluate the results from your programmatic and native?
So, knowing the industry average is something that I don't know that enough people are willing to ask about, because I think maybe you feel like if we take arbitrage as an example, once you dip your toe into that, I think if you were to ask the company doing your arbitrage, hey, what should our results be? I think you're going into that from a poor place. So just having the knowledge and being willing to ask the questions is extremely important. And the only way that I am aware of what any metrics, average metrics, target metrics were because I asked the question. And when I didn't know what the range of the margins for arbitrage were. It was not something that I taught in school. If there is a school teaching that, it's probably
IAB, you know, maybe some of the industry certifications that way, or you
right.
know,
But so anyway, I asked, and the answer that I received was anywhere from 5 to 30% is, and obviously that's a big range, and it definitely depends on the type of traffic and the content that you're directing them towards. For a publisher like us, if you are interested, I think that if you are in that 15 to 25% range, those are the margins that I think are you would be seeing good results with.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Awesome. Cool, everyone. So wanted to transition to the question and answer period. Also wanted to thank Neal for his time today. You know, give you some time to get into some of the questions. I think we've got a couple in so far, so keep firing away and we can keep this going for a bit.
Sure.
Neal, you want to hang out for maybe like, what, 10 minutes?
Yeah, I definitely, I got 15 minutes, so.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. I guess, Dave, you are asking what percentage of our Facebook traffic is organic. So I just want to clarify, are you asking how much of our Facebook traffic are we buying? Can you clarify that? Or are you, I just want to make sure I can answer this correctly. Oh, I see. Sorry, I should have read the whole thing. We don't actually buy a lot of Facebook traffic. Maybe 5% of our traffic is paid traffic through advertising with Facebook. We have several large Facebook pages. I think if you combine the 4, we probably have about 9 million fans. So that gives us great ability to drive traffic to our website. And then we also have partnerships with several other large Facebook properties, and they will share content back and forth. So a very small percentage is paid for. So I hope that answered your question.
I see him exclaiming, wow. So he's very
Wow.
happy with the answer.
Wow.
Cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Then we got Hannah. Question for Neal. What are the ways you negotiated with your current partners while you were still at the beginning of your story? Was it equity, rev share, share profit growth, etc.?
Hannah, I think I used the old school schmooze tactic and just hyped us up and shared really what I believed was our potential and some timeline and some benchmarks. So I think it was just getting the partners to see our vision, share that, and that's where the trust came in, and that's what's allowed us to grow. And while a partnership with MonetizeMore is very directly related to money, we have partnerships that, regardless of how much money we make, it doesn't have any impact on what they make. And I think all partnerships have just been formed on the basis of being open, explaining our passion for what we do and what we're willing to put in ourselves, and then finding a partner that believes you and is willing to take that gamble. Because I do think for MonetizeMore, it was somewhat of a gamble. We weren't meeting their traffic requirements to be in their enterprise level. So I had to, we had several conversations, and once we really had a plan in place, MonetizeMore, stepped up with us, and here we are, just a little over a year later. So.
Awesome. Any more questions? Yeah, thanks with fun emoji there. Got another question from Dave. How much have you scaled content in the last year?
So if you're referring to the editorial content, we've definitely scaled in the quantity, but we've actually been focusing much more on the quality of the content. So we are currently hiring. Actually, we're looking to hire a managing editor right now. We are also looking to hire some additional freelance writers. But I really understood very early on that the content was the vehicle that would allow us to generate revenue. And another way that I believe that I helped DearMember grow was when I started, we were only writing the stories that were directly related to nostalgia. But after looking at our audience demographics and understanding who they were, we were able to find some other verticals that worked extraordinarily well. So it broadened the scope of the content that we could write about, which makes it easier for our writers to get their pitches approved. But it's our editorial is what we've put the most money into currently over the past quarter, I would say.
Yeah, and it's like establishing those editorial guidelines, making sure that, it's that quality, right? And it's not just pumping out 10 pieces a day, that kind of thing. It's about, let's make this notable because we don't want to sacrifice our audience and that kind
And
of thing.
especially since so much of our traffic comes from Facebook, and I don't think you can go a day without hearing about clickbait or fake news.
Right.
So, um, my feeling in regards to taking people off of Facebook and bring them onto your site is, Facebook, it's a feed. People are just scrolling on their phone. So you just need to have that image or that headline pop, but not in a way where it's misleading. So we definitely, in order to do that well and still have a good click through, you just really need good writers.
Yeah. And, there's that frequency, there's, how much should you be investing in your headline compared to that kind of thing to try and game it. But I think those are all kind of short-term kind of hacks compared to actually just developing really solid content for when you actually get them there, you keep them there. So,
Right.
yeah. Cool. I think one more from Hannah. Is the audience for DearMember.com international by any chance? What are your
Uh,
best?
we are almost 100% US traffic, which made the GDPR thing a little easier for us. So yes, that was an easy one. Thank you.
Yeah. And she's asking like some best suggestions for looking for partners for a very international audience. And yeah, Hannah, I can follow up. We do have some recommendations for international audiences. We work with tons of publishers and tons of different regions. And depending on where your audience is based or where you're getting your traffic from, we can make some partner recommendations for you that way. So if you want to follow up with me, I can give you that recommendation. Cool. Great. Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah. Any last questions?
The
I think
final
there's,
count.
Dave's asking how many pieces you're posting per day.
Oh, you'd have to check our Facebook page.
That's right. And yeah, everyone go like DearMember.com, obviously, because everyone's in nostalgia content, everyone getting into this late 20s to 30s to 40s. That's when we really start coming back to all of our childhood memories and things like that. Even myself, that when I first kind of learned about the DearMember.com story, I kind of checked it out. I was like, yeah, that's something I want in my feed. So yeah.
And also, just to just mention, the largest growing demographic on Facebook is like plus 35, I want to say. And our audience is just skews above plus 35. So that's where we are, and that's where we plan to stay.
Yeah, and that's very easy monetization because those people have disposable income. They basically, 50 plus controls pretty much in entirety, like 2/3 or something of GDP in the US. Like it's crazy the amount of power they have and that there's such an underserved demographic for content.
And they also click
Yeah,
the ads.
exactly. Cool. Yeah, I think that is everything. Once again, thank you everyone for attending today. We'll be posting for our next webinar over the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned. Make sure to follow us on our social and follow our weekly ad tech newsletter where we kind of summarize some of the key developments in the publisher ad tech landscape, as well as highlight some of the great content that we post on the MonetizeMore blog and YouTube channel. So once again, thanks again for to Neal for his taking the time today and helping promote this webinar with us. It's been great to kind of partner with them and really be essential to their growth. And if everyone's looking to scale up your growth, you can get in touch with MonetizeMore anytime. My email is brandon@monetizemore.com. Neal's, you can reach out to him for any publisher questions you have at neal@DearMember.com. And yeah, really hope to see you around the MonetizeMore community, and talk to you soon.
Don't forget to like, comment, and share on our Facebook page.
Yeah, and DearMember.com actually has a pretty solid LinkedIn page if you want to get your content that way too.
That's very true. Thank you, Brendan, for having me. This has been great, and thanks everybody for watching.
Awesome. Great.
Bye, guys.
Bye.